Okay, hello everybody. So today we're going to be moving into a new section. We are still in chapter 5, but this is chapter 5, section 5. And what chapter 5, section 5 is going to do is to introduce us to kind of a combination type problem. We have already previously studied absolute value equations. We are now going to look a little bit at absolute value inequalities. And so, if you're unsure what an absolute value inequality is, you can see that that is what you see listed right here. You can see that that is the absolute value of x, and that is greater than or equal to positive 2. And so, I'm going to show you how to solve something like that. So, the absolute value inequality is a graph of and it's going to be an overlap graph. And absolute value inequalities or are going to look like this. So this is very similar to what we had in the last chapter and section with and or graphs. So this says solve and graph absolute value. And so there's a very key thing that hopefully you remember from whenever we discussed the absolute value equations. And that key thing is that these get split into two different problems. Really important. They get split into two different problems. And in doing so, when you split it into two problems, you actually have to add a negative in. Now, if you remember a little bit about whenever we were talking about dividing and multiplying both sides by a negative, that also will flip over the inequality. So there's quite a bit of little teeny details here that we really need to pay attention to in order to be able to solve these correctly. So let's start out by doing one of these problems. It's just probably easier for me to show you. So what we're going to have first is we are going to split this, and I'm going to put a line right here. This is very important. All of these problems are going to split into two separate problems, and it's your job to write them as two different problems. So the first problem is pretty easy. We're going to leave the thing alone. The only thing that we did is we dropped the absolute value bars. As you can see, I just wrote m plus 8 is less than 11. So that's simple enough. But the second part to this is when the problem splits. And this, again, you're going to write the m plus 8. But this time, there's two things that have to happen. You have to flip the inequality sign over, and you have to make the 11 a negative 11. Now, that's really important that you do those two things. And I'm going to highlight this again. This is a less than, it becomes a greater than, and it becomes a negative 11. So you need to flip both the sign over as well as make the last number a negative. And now from here, these are just a matter of solving them. They're pretty straightforward. You're going to subtract 8 from both sides. So you'll have m is less than 3. And over here, you're going to subtract 8 from both sides. But in this case, you're going to have m is greater than negative 19. Okay, now we need to determine what is going to happen here. And these turn into an and. These are going to turn into one equation, or I should say inequality. And the way that we're going to do this is as follows. You take the one that has the smaller number. In this case, the negative 19 is the smaller number. Okay, and we're going to flip-flop everything. So I'm going to write negative 19, and then I'm going to write a less than, and then an m. Okay, so what you can see there is I just flipped over the expression. Now, why did I do that? Well, we have to list these as an and. And when an and inequality has the variable stuck in the middle, and then you have the smaller number and then the larger number. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this right here, and I'm going to cut this out so you can see. Now remember, I flipped over the negative one. I'm going to move this over. You can see me moving this over. And if I line up these m's, now my writing's not perfect, but you can see that if I took this little thing right here, after I flipped it over, so the smallest number was to the left, and I put this right here, boom, you can see I have my and inequality now. That's what I end up with. I end up with negative 19 is less than m, but then m is less than 3. So I'm not going to leave that there, but I am going to write that. Negative 19 is less than m, which is less than 3. And so what I want you to notice is we start with the smallest number. We have the variable in the middle, and then we have the largest number, just like that. And so now we have it combined into one inequality, and then we need to graph this. So I'm going to draw my line. And then I'm actually going to count by twos. So it's going to be negative 20, and then 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 0, and then 2, and then we're going to go to 4 right there. Now, I counted by twos because it's such a far distance apart. And now we need to put dots, right? So looking at this inequality, the negative 19 has a strict inequality, so it will be an open dot on negative 19. The 3 is a strict inequality, so it will be an open dot on 3, and then we're going to shade everything in the center, and we get our inequality like that. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Let's recap what we did. The first thing we did is we dropped the absolute values and just solved the problem. The second thing that we did is we dropped the absolute values, but I flipped over the inequality sign and I made that number negative. Once I did that, I solved it and I got two different solutions. But I took the one that has the smaller number. In this case, the negative 19 is smaller than 3, and I flipped it over. And once I flipped it over, I combined them into one inequality. And then from there, I graphed it. So let's try another one. Okay. All right. So I'm going to draw my line here with an X, not an X, with a black marker or a pencil. And now I'm going to write my inequality. So 5y minus 3 is less than or equal to 7. So I don't do anything. I leave it alone, drop the absolute values, write everything. Now the second one, I'm going to write it again, 5y minus 3. But the inequality gets flipped over and the number becomes negative. Okay, two things. Inequality gets flipped over and the number becomes negative. And now I'm going to solve these like I would otherwise solve these. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I get 5y is less than or equal to 10. I'm going to divide by 5. And I get y is less than or equal to 2. Okay, so there's my first answer. This one, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. 5y is greater than or equal to negative 4. Then I'm going to divide by 5. And I'm going to get y is greater than or equal to negative 4/5. Okay, now you have to determine which one has the smaller number. This one is the smaller number. So that one needs to be flipped over. So I'm going to write negative 4/5. When I flip it over, I have to flip the sign over and then draw my y. Okay, now let me show you again. We're going to take this one that we flipped over and I'm going to superimpose it over this one, just like that. And you can see when I put it there, I get my combined and inequality. Now, again, I'm not going to leave that there, but I am going to write what I had there, which is negative 4/5 is less than or equal to y, and then that was less than or equal to 2. Now, once I have done that, I can draw my number line. And we're starting with, we'll go with negative 1, then 0, then 1, and then 2 like that. Okay, we'll go up to 3. Now we need to look at what kind of dots we have. Now in this case, you can see the negative 4/5 has a less than or equal to. So that less than or equal to is going to be a solid dot. Now that's almost negative 1, but not quite. So there's going to be a solid dot right there. Now the other number that we have is 2. And that number is less than or equal to. So that is also going to be a solid dot. And then we're going to shade in between, just like that. Okay? So hopefully this is making sense to you. We got one more to do. Okay? And so this one, 2x plus 1, the absolute value of 2x plus 1 is less than 5, is same thing. We're going to draw our line here. We're going to split this into two two problems. Okay, I'm going to write 2x plus 1 is less than 5. So we just drop the absolute values. Then I'm going to write the same thing, 2x plus 1, but I'm going to flip the sign over and make the number negative. So it becomes negative 5. Now from there, I need to solve each one of these. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I get 2x is less than 4. Then I'm going to divide by 2, and I get x is less than 2. Now over here, I'm going to subtract 1. I get 2x is greater than negative 6. Then I'm going to divide by 2, and I'm going to get x is greater than negative 3. Now, from there, once again, we have to identify which number is the smaller. Is negative 3 or is 2 smaller? Well, clearly negative 3 is smaller. So that negative 3 right there, I'm going to take this thing right here. Whoops, not yet. I'm not going to do that yet. I need to flip that over. So negative 3 is less than x, like that. Okay. Once I flip that over, I'm going to take this expression and I'm going to move it over here with the other one. And you can see when the x's line up, now that one doesn't line up as well, but I get negative 3 is less than x. X is less than 2. And so that is what I'm going to write. Negative 3 is less than x. Whoops, sorry. Negative 3 is less than x. X is less than 2. And then that is going to be what I draw a graph of. So if I do this, this is negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1. We'll go out to 2 and 3. Okay, then we need to put a dot. We're going to put an open dot on negative 3. Whoops, didn't mean to. I said open dot, and then I drew a closed one. Put an open dot on negative 3. And then we're going to put also an open dot on 2. Why are they both open? Because they're both strict inequalities. There's no equal sign on them. And the last thing to do is to shade in the middle of those two dots. And there's your graph. So there you go, guys. I hope that made sense. There's obviously a lot more steps to this than when we first started dealing with inequalities, but like anything, if you try baby steps, please make sure you're watching the videos. And if you are confused on anything, ask me for help. I'm happy to try to help you. So have a great day. If you need anything, feel free to email me.